in an attempt to silence me. Why can't you be as calm and polite as Nikki? All you know how to do is complain.
If you're so unhappy in this family, leave. Anyway, you don't contribute much to the household. You're more of a hindrance.
The problem began with threats to refuse to pay for my university expenses and ended with my parents kicking me out of the house as soon as I turned 18. It was a terrible time for me. With nowhere to go and not enough money to sustain myself, I had to rely on all my ingenuity to avoid ending up on the streets. I don't think I come from a dysfunctional family, or at least I didn't think so when I was little. My family always treated me well, providing me with all the love and care necessary despite never being in the best economic situation. And indeed, that's how it continued during the first years of my life, in a practically idyllic harmony where, although I was never the favored one at home, they never denied me basic attention. Everything began to change, without me even realizing it, when my brother Nicky was born. Now that you're going to become a big brother, you'll have to take on more responsibilities and help us always ensure his well-being. Understood? My father stated this with pride, thus passing on his own excitement about having a new member in the family to me. And although at first I didn't understand why everyone was so excited, soon the reason why all the adults around me were so thrilled became clear. This is something I learned many years later, well into adolescence, but my own birth was not planned. Rather, it was the result of a careless night of partying and drunkenness. There was nothing wrong with it. Or, better said, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it at that time. But many things that I considered as unchangeable truths in my early youth would soon be shaken. Nicky turned out to be the perfect child in my parents' eyes, not only because of his beauty, but also because of his friendly character and all the successes he seemed destined to achieve from a very young age. Not only my parents, but everyone who knew him didn't hesitate to shower him with compliments, praising him for his good looks and his good behavior. Soon, the comparisons began.
Caleb, why can't you be a bit more like your brother? Look how sociable he is. They've barely met the neighbor's son and they're already playing as if they've been friends for a lifetime.
But Mom, he's 3 years old. Anyone who approaches you at 3 years old, you consider them your friend. Not only should you be more sociable, but also improve your grades. Who goes to 3rd grade and doesn't have an A in all subjects? Surely Nicky could do better. He can already read and do sums. He's way ahead of his peers. He actually only knows a few letters and can count to 10.
Jealousy is a very bad thing, son. It corrodes the soul.
Perhaps my mother was right, and feeling jealous was a waste of time. But my relatives did nothing to prevent me from feeling overshadowed by my younger brother. On the contrary, whenever Nicky did something even remotely praiseworthy, no matter how routine or irrelevant it seemed to me, they found a way to turn it into a commendable feat. The comparisons became a daily occurrence. At first, they were minor things like, "Why can't you clean your room as neatly as your brother?" Or, "You need to dress better. You have enough decent clothes not to go around looking like a vagabond. Look at your brother, always so handsome." But gradually, as the years passed, they escalated. And they not only criticized me for things I did wrong, but also used the things I did well to reproach me for not doing better. "Don't let it get to your head. I'm not that good, and you're not that bad." That's hard to believe when every moment of the day they make sure to remind me otherwise, as if instead of having 2 children, they only had 1. And the remaining teenager was just a random person they had to deal with out of obligation, never out of personal affection. Do you want me to talk to them? If you could do me that favor, they'll listen to you for sure. They always listened to Nicky, no matter what he said. So it was a surprise to discover that this turned out to be the exception that proved the rule. Nicky, who did try to fulfill the promise he had made to me and convince my parents to treat me better, was completely ignored when he brought up the issue. Not only did our parents change the subject as soon as either of us tried to call their attention to it, but once they got tired of giving us the runaround, they flat out told us that we were imagining things and that they loved us both equally. If they were stricter with me, to the point of giving me more chores at home than I deserved, it was only because they wanted the best for me and knew I could strive for more. They indulged Nicky in everything, giving him gifts and sparing him responsibilities, while burdening me with more work and reproaches that often had no basis. Why can't I sign up for guitar classes? I've gotten excellent grades in all my subjects, as we agreed I would. There isn't enough money. Besides, why would you do extracurricular activities? That's a waste of time. You have things to do at home. But the classes are free. The school provides them, and they even lend the instruments themselves.
Your father already told you no, you don't have time for those nonsense activities.
The curious thing was that there was always time and money to waste for Nicky. As soon as he showed interest in an activity, no matter how impractical it was, my parents went out of their way to make sure he could attend. And Nicky wasn't a bad person. He had shown that on numerous occasions when he tried to help me get a fairer deal. But he wasn't the perfect being. Everyone claimed he was either. My brother was too impulsive and indecisive. The activity that brought him pleasure today could hold zero interest for him the following week. It was inconvenient for me, but my parents seemed unfazed, blinded as they were by the halo of splendor they saw in Nicky. Needless to say, they didn't demand the perfect scores from him that they expected from me. At first, when I was very young, I tolerated this. But as I grew up and realized that instead of changing, the situation was escalating, my complaints became more constant, to the point that my parents were forced to confront me and punish me more often, in an attempt to silence me. Why can't you be as calm and polite as Nicky? All you know how to do is complain.
If you're so unhappy in this family, leave. Anyway, you don't contribute much to the household. You're more of a hindrance.
The problem began with threats to refuse to pay for my university expenses and ended with my parents kicking me out of the house as soon as I turned 18. It was a terrible time for me. With nowhere to go and not enough money to sustain myself, I had to rely on all my ingenuity to avoid ending up on the streets. I survived thanks to the kindness of some friends who let me stay in their home until I could afford an apartment. I abandoned my educational opportunities in favor of getting a job to survive. And yes, after a few years, I managed to stabilize and start a new life away from parents who rejected me shamelessly. I lost contact with them, although I still occasionally spoke to Nicky, as he was the only one who still cared about me and even sent me some money in those first few months when I struggled to save enough to support myself.
Our parents are in debt. They're trying to hide it from me, so I don't worry, but I know what's going on. I'm not blind.
Let them dig themselves out of the hole on their own. They're old enough to know how to spend their meager fortune.
You know very well that they waste too much, and their carpentry business is about to collapse. Couldn't you lend them a hand now that you're doing well?
Why would I help them after everything they did to me? You helped them, since they treated you so well. Nicky did want to help, but contrary to what our relatives predicted, things weren't going so well for him in life. At 20, he had dropped out of university to take a gap year traveling around Europe, which my parents funded without sparing any expenses. And now that he was back in the country, he had taken on a part-time job at a fast food chain that obviously didn't pay very well. As for me, I had managed to stabilize my life and resume my studies. I got a job at a veterinary clinic, which provided me with a good salary and even allowed me to save some money. I had no interest in getting involved with my parents again, so I wished Nicky luck and completely washed my hands of the matter. It was several months later when I found out that my parents' financial problems had escalated to the point where they were about to have their car and house repossessed. The police had already knocked on their door, and from what I could gather, they were also being investigated for fraud.
It's all a mistake, Caleb. You must help us. We didn't realize the debts had piled up so much, and we needed the money to give you and Nicky a better future.
Only to Nicky, rather. And yet I can see that you've squandered a lot on indulgences for yourselves.
Don't be like that. We did everything we could to give you a good childhood. It's just that you were always a very rebellious child, always demanding more than we could give.
My parents begged for help, but beyond offering some advice, I didn't extend a helping hand. Everything I had built from the age of 18 until that moment was the result of my own efforts, and I wasn't going to let anyone convince me otherwise. However, other people weren't so forgiving. As it turned out, my parents had borrowed a great deal of money from people they knew and refused to pay them back. Some of those people were their customers or suppliers, and they owed tens of thousands of dollars to many of them. Some were so angry that they even spray painted the words "liar" on the side of my parents' house. On top of that, their home was broken into several times and much of their belongings were stolen. Even their cars were broken into and stolen. For me, though, I never considered seeking revenge as such. However, things for my parents finally crossed the point of no return when they were finally arrested for embezzlement. After the police took them away, a local newspaper contacted me to interview me about them and my childhood. It may not have been my intention to publicly humiliate them, but by telling the truth about how they kicked me out of the house, that's exactly what happened. As for Nicky, well, I made sure to take care of him, and he moved in with me. In the end, I went from being a pariah, rejected by my own parents, to having free access to the family properties again and being seen almost as a hero in the media, while my parents had to serve a long sentence. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more stories. Mary's dad stood up with evil in his eyes and veins popping out of his neck. He charged at me full speed and punched me right in the face. I fell to the ground and hit my head on the corner of the table, and I started gushing blood from both my nose and my head. Hi, I'm Jack. It had been almost a year since I first started dating Mary, and things were going amazing. I was starting to get a little bit older and had seen all of my peers get married around me while I remained the single one, and I was tired of it. Mary was much younger than me, but she had made it clear that she was also ready for a serious relationship, and we both had talked about the possibility of getting married one day soon. With this being said, we decided it was time to meet each other's parents. My parents are extremely kind and loving and accepted her with open arms, but almost the exact opposite could be said about her parents. She had told me growing up that her father was extremely strict, but he loved her more than anything. He would always act very nasty towards her boyfriends and seemed like he wanted her to be his little girl forever, which rubbed me the wrong way if I'm being honest. I mean, I understand being close with your daughter, but why would you be so against her growing up and being an adult? It seemed pretty weird to me, but whatever. Despite these harrowing stories, I was excited to go meet my potential wife's parents. When we arrived, I got this really nervous feeling in my stomach, which told me something might go terribly wrong. I ignored this feeling and chalked it up to nerves. When we stepped inside, her dad glared at me with rage in his eyes. It was extremely awkward, because he didn't even introduce himself or anything. He just started glaring at me. My girlfriend Mary broke the awkward silence by introducing me to her parents.
Mom, Dad, this is Jack. He's a teacher and he's amazing.
Oh, well, isn't that wonderful?
Teacher? He's a teacher? So he's basically poor. Teachers make no money at all. How is he going to support you? This insensitive comment didn't bother me much, but it told me all I needed to know about Mary's father. It was clear he was extremely greedy, and he didn't care about making a positive change in the world, which is why I was becoming a teacher. I decided to move on, and we continued on with our visit. Eventually, I caught her dad glaring at me again, and could tell he was about to grill me with a question. So, Jack, tell me, what are your intentions with my daughter? Well, I happen to love your daughter very much, and I even see us potentially tying the knot one day. You raised a wonderfully beautiful woman, and I'm honored to say I get to be with her. What? You're planning on taking my only daughter away from me? You can't do that. She's mine forever. It was like he snapped. Mary's dad stood up with evil in his eyes and veins popping out of his neck. He charged at me full speed and punched me right in the face. I fell to the ground and hit my head on the corner of the table, and I started gushing blood from both my nose and my head. As I lay there in a daze, Mary wandered over and barely even seemed to care or even be surprised.
Oh, are you okay? Looks like you took quite a fall. My dad loses his temper sometimes, you understand, don't you?
Are you serious? Just get me the heck out of here. I was seriously injured from being attacked, and I barely was able to walk out of their place on my own. I drove home with Mary in silence because I was furious at how she handled the situation. After I cleaned myself up, I was still feeling extremely dizzy and disoriented, but I decided to confront Mary. What was that back there? You totally flaked on me. You should have had my back. I mean, your dad is crazy.
Well, you have to understand, I'm his little girl. He's just protective, that's all. He was just trying to be a good dad.
A good dad? Are you kidding me? He almost killed me, and I probably have a concussion at the very least. I'm filing a police report for this.
What? Are you that much of a wimp that you can't take a little beating?
At that, I stormed out and away from Macy because she was talking crazy. I checked myself into the hospital to see what was wrong with my head and my nose, since they still throbbed like the beating had just happened. The doctors revealed to me that not only was I concussed, I had minor brain damage and my nose was broken. I was infuriated. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I had to file a police report. I recalled Mary telling me that her dad was some big-time lawyer and that he relied heavily on his public image to get clients. I decided that I would seek my revenge in ruining his practice. First, I went to the police station and filed a report, and brought my medical evidence as proof as well. The police told me my best course of action would be to sue Mary's father for the beating, since there was nobody who would help testify against him. I hired the best lawyer in my town, and we began working together to bring justice to that evil man. My lawyer spent a couple of days following Mary's father around, and he discovered that he had some dark secrets of his own. It turns out that Mary's father's bad temper wasn't only towards Mary's love interests, but to Mary's own mother as well. Every night, Mary's father would beat Mary's mother for no reason at all. My lawyer successfully got picture evidence of this abuse, and we stored it safely away. Finally, it was time to come after Mary's father hard. In the courtroom, my lawyer presented the evidence to the judge, and we ended up winning the case. Mary's father was forced to pay $100,000 to me for my suffering, which more than covered the expenses of the hospital bill.
Well, I can see you are a weak little man who had to resort to suing me, huh?
Don't get too comfortable. I'm not even close to being done. I got permanent brain damage from your beating, you know that? I'm going to burn you to the ground.
I'd like to see you try.
The very next day, I began tracking down each and every one of Mary's father's clients, and one by one, I sent the evidence of his abuse to them. They were all disgusted with their lawyer's actions, and they fired him immediately. It was at this point that I heard from Mary for the first time in a couple of days. She showed up to my door and was furious.
Are you kidding me? You sued my dad and made him lose a bunch of clients? I thought we could work past this.
Absolutely not, Mary. You didn't support me when I needed it the most. Me and you are finished. Now get the heck out of my life. But first, I have something I think you might want to see. I showed Mary the picture proof of her father abusing her mother, and she broke down into tears. Her attitude suddenly completely changed about her dad, and even apologized and asked to get back together, to which I politely declined. I believe she showed her true colors that day, and I didn't want anything to do with her. Even now that Mary was gone for good, I still didn't feel completely satisfied. I decided that the only thing left for me to do would be to release the proof of his abuse to the internet and let them deal with it. I posted the picture evidence along with my entire story, and it went completely viral. It got almost 1 million hits in only one day, and people were furious. One of the furious people happened to work for the state, and saw to it that Mary's father would be disbarred, meaning he would never be allowed to work as a lawyer ever again. Afterwards, angry internet trolls leaked his address, and people began vandalizing his house, which he could not repair because he had no money from being sued, and was not making any new money because he no longer had a job. Because his house was pretty much destroyed, he was forced to move to a tiny apartment with a bug infestation and barely had enough money to feed himself and Mary's mother. But finally, it was at this point when Mary's mother gathered up the courage to leave her abusive husband, and she left to start a new life and meet new people who would treat her right. As Mary's father began to starve, he tried to steal from a local grocery store, where he was caught and brought to jail. When the judge saw he was an abusive man, he decided not to give him a second chance and sentenced him to 2 years in prison for shoplifting. I've heard that Mary no longer speaks to her father at all, but now has an amazing relationship with her mother as they heal from their abusive father. I can't say I feel too bad for Mary's father, since I have no remorse for a scumbag who hits women. But what do you think? Do you think I went too far?
Then my boss stormed the venue.
What a dreadful meeting. With what I pay you, Emma, you could have at least bought a decent wreath of flowers.
What are you doing here?
What does it look like? Mourning a dead man I don't even know? It's obvious that I've come to fetch you to return to your job. We have a lot to do, and you can't afford to have more days off. I've indulged you too much, and you owe me.
I owe you nothing, and this is a funeral. It's best if you leave.
No, I'm not moving from here until you accompany me. And they can't kick me out because this is a public event, and I have the right to be here as long as I please. You are my employee, and you have to obey me. Hey, you are disturbing this funeral. Can you leave now, please? Just shut up and focus on your Bible.
One could say I've always been fortunate when it comes to work because, not long after finishing college, I quickly found my dream job at a digital marketing company. The company was a multinational, known in multiple countries around the world as one of the top 10 in its field. So, I had high hopes for it to progress. And yes, at first everything seemed perfect. The work was enjoyable, I learned a lot from the more experienced employees, and the salary was above the average for someone relatively new like me. Everything was fine, in my opinion, except for the boss.
What are you waiting for? You have a project to deliver at 12 sharp, and you're still here lazing around. If I don't see you back at your desks within 30 seconds, I'll deduct the time lost from your salary, and you'll have to make up those hours outside of your schedule. But sir, we're on our break, and the project is almost finished. We just need to review it and deliver it. Do you think that's going to happen on its own? Get to it right now. We're losing clients because of your foolishness, and I wouldn't want to have to replace you for such a minuscule mistake. I know you're not very bright, but I think even you can understand this.
The boss had not a shred of consideration for others. He didn't treat us like his employees, but like slaves of the company who were lucky that he even spoke to them. It wasn't allowed to contradict him, not even when it was obvious that he was wrong. He demanded that we do a multitude of tasks that didn't necessarily belong to us and unpaid overtime. If you behaved well and overloaded yourself with work, doing it as best as possible, he wouldn't say anything. If for any reason your performance deteriorated, he would make sure to reproach you for it for weeks. Shouting was often heard in the office because the boss took it out on someone different every day to vent his anger. And it was very common for a colleague to take sick leave due to stress or resign every week. He's done it again. When are they going to replace him?
Is that even possible? The boss comes from a wealthy family. They've been in this business for decades. They don't own the entire company, but it's almost as if they do.
Still, someone should report him.
Good luck with that.
Despite not liking the boss, no one dared to contradict him. They didn't want to lose a job that was so hard to come by, and rightly so, since the threat of speaking ill of the deserters, as the boss called them, to potential new companies, so they wouldn't hear them again in that city was also there. In the years I spent at this company working for him, I discovered that the best strategy for my mental health was to obey as much as possible and ignore any attempts to engage in conflict. If the boss felt I deserved a scolding for something, I took it with fortitude, without letting myself get riled up. Perhaps this could be considered a somewhat cowardly attitude, given the severity of the treatment received from my superior, but my ambition was high, and I knew that the only way to thrive in the company was to endure whatever the boss threw at me. It was indeed how I eventually landed in the position of head of the sales department. I wasn't second in command at that company, but I had quite a bit of responsibility compared to when I started. Everything seemed to be going fairly well, all things considered, until I received the call. I need to take a couple of days off. I'm afraid I have to attend a funeral.
How inconvenient. Can it wait? After all, the person is already dead. Focus on your life. Tomorrow, we have an important meeting with a client, and if we want our products to be exported to Asia, we'd better not disappoint.
I'm sorry, but I won't be able to be there. My father passed away a few hours ago, and I need the time to be with my family. I've already spoken to Human Resources to proceed with the paperwork.
Well, if that's the gratitude I receive for advancing your career, fine. Go to the darn funeral. Anyway, nobody here is indispensable.
The boss seemed angry, like a child denied a candy, but I didn't care. I knew those days off were owed to me by law, and besides, at that moment I was so blinded by anger and the pain of loss that I completely abandoned my passive attitude, and I no longer cared if I said something slightly inappropriate that would anger him. I thought he would reluctantly give in because he had no other choice, and then when I returned to my office on Monday, he would give me the scolding of the century. I thought that during those days when I was absent, he would leave me alone and wouldn't even call me. But how wrong I was. The day after I left work, I started receiving multiple calls and text messages from my boss, demanding that I return to my job immediately. I responded to the first message by repeating that I was on leave, please do not contact me anymore, and we would talk when I returned. But the harassment continued as if nothing had happened, to the point where I had to turn off my phone. My father's funeral was a very emotional experience for me, as I had always had a very close relationship with him, and although his death was expected due to his illness, his passing was still a hard shock that I was barely beginning to accept. I felt surrounded by my family, safe in that funeral home for a few hours. A priest had come to give a small mass in honor of my father before we headed to the cemetery, and all the relatives had gathered in front of the coffin. Then my boss stormed the venue.
What a dreadful meeting. With what I pay you, Emma, you could have at least bought a decent wreath of flowers.
What are you doing here?
What does it look like? mourning a dead man I don't even know? It's obvious that I've come to fetch you to return to your job. We have a lot to do, and you can't afford to have more days off. I've indulged you too much, and you owe me.
I owe you nothing, and this is a funeral. It's best if you leave.
No, I'm not moving from here until you accompany me. And they can't kick me out because this is a public event, and I have the right to be here as long as I please. You are my employee, and you have to obey me. Hey, you are disturbing this funeral. Can you leave now, please? Just shut up and focus on your Bible.
Not only did he stand there in the middle of the room, immovable, but he also continued to make obscene comments in front of my entire family about me and my supposed lack of manners for refusing to comply with his demands. There was a point where he even dared to spit on my father's coffin, calling the attendees to the service deadbeats, and repeating over and over that I associated with nothing but worthless riffraff. Several people, including the priest, politely asked my boss to leave because I wasn't going to leave the funeral home. But he flatly refused and kept bothering, even going so far as to threaten violence against anyone who tried to remove him. In the end, the police had to come to remove him from the premises, and a big commotion ensued. My boss reacted violently, first insulting and trying to flee from the officers, then engaging in fisticuffs with anyone who tried to approach him. After 10 minutes of chaos, the police managed to apprehend him and took him to the police station, where he would spend some time locked up for assault, resisting arrest, and disturbing public order. It was uncomfortable for everyone, but at least the funeral could finally continue peacefully as planned. I thought that would be the end of it, not wanting to think more about what happened to my boss, and focused as I was on my mourning. But a few hours later, I realized I was wrong.
Hey, have you seen this video? Your boss is in it, and it seems to have gone viral on TikTok.
It can't be. Let me see.
Look at the comments. People are canceling him, saying all sorts of nasty things, and rightfully so.
Apparently, someone present at my father's funeral had taken out their cell phone and started recording when my boss interrupted the ceremony, and the disturbances began. Therefore, the video showed an accurate portrayal of all the despicable attitudes of the aforementioned, from the lack of respect in front of a deceased person's coffin to how violent his arrest later became. Internet users were as, or even more outraged than my own family, to the point where the video was massively shared, accumulating millions of views and eventually making its way to public television, where my boss was announced as a crazy criminal who must have a hobby of crashing into such solemn ceremonies. By the time I returned to work on Monday, my boss was still in jail. The charges didn't seem likely to be dismissed anytime soon.
Emma, considering the absolutely inappropriate behavior of your boss, would you be interested in taking his position?
How so?
Even if the charges were dropped or it didn't go to trial, in this company, we're not interested in having someone so problematic in a position of authority. We're going to fire him anyway, and his position will be vacant. So if you're interested, we'd be delighted to have you.
After everything that happened, I didn't feel guilty about accepting, thus becoming the CEO of the company practically overnight. I visited my former boss in jail a few days later to make sure of how he was doing, and somehow convince myself that karma had been playing in my favor. I never planned to drop the charges, but my ego demanded an apology, and also to make my former boss see how far he had come by behaving as he did.
I didn't do anything wrong, just demanded what was rightfully mine, that my employees fulfill their schedule. I don't owe any apology.
My ex-boss's stubbornness never faded, and with it, his misfortune also followed. When I told him I was the new CEO, he got angry and started cursing the board chairman, saying they betrayed him, but I just laughed. At the end, not only did he end up serving a sentence of over a year, but the social media cancellation continued as well. My former boss was fired, no company wanted to hire him again, and he lost money trying to hire the best lawyers to get him out of trouble. Unfortunately for him, when he was freed, it wasn't going to be so easy to escape social disgrace. Realizing the kind of person he was, his wife filed for divorce, denying him the right to see their daughter again. My former boss became a meme, and eventually had to move to another country to start over. The last I heard of him was that he was working in a small fast food company in a city that didn't even show up on maps because even with his money and contacts, he couldn't recover. I, on the other hand, finally took my desired position as CEO and never again had to deal with superiors like my former boss at work. What do you think about my ex-boss? Did he get what he deserved? My father and mother were both wonderful, beautiful people who were in love with each other like no other. They met young, married young, and had me in their early 20s, but they took care of me as best as they could, at least until I was 5 years old when my mother was taken from us by a drunk driver. My father and I were inconsolable for years after. When I was 7, my father met another woman named Diana, who initially seemed quite nice and normal.
Diana, this is my daughter Cassie.
Oh, how cute. Hi, Cassie. I am Diana. How are you doing today?
Fine, I guess.
She's a little shy.
Although this was true, I was also very apprehensive. I had no issue with my father dating. It took him long enough, and it was good to see him smile every once in a while. But being a single father who was also a widow wasn't as easy as it sounds for most women. And of course, my father always felt guilty too. He would reassure me that he still loved my mother very much and would never stop loving her. Being a child of trauma helped me realize and be mature enough to understand that, of course, things don't always stay the same.
I always wanted kids of my own.
Oh, I think you'd be a great mother.
I think we're ready. We should try.
Everything seemed to be going as well as it could be for the next year. They got married, and then out of the blue, Diana removed my late mom's pictures in the living room, and my dad said nothing. One day, I was asked to come into the living room.
Cassie, honey, we have some wonderful news.
I am pregnant.
I was happy and a little jealous, but overall, I was trying to be mature and supportive. The next few months flew by so quickly it felt like a fevered dream, and by the end of it, my little baby sister was born. I should have realized something was wrong when I was first introduced to little Mandy when they came home from the hospital.
Look, honey, it's your baby sister.
It's your half-sister, Mandy.
Wait, why not just call them sisters?
I think it's just honest parenting to make sure they know one is from me and the other from your ex-wife.
We talked about this. She died. We never broke up.
Diana would roll her eyes when Scott would correct her about my bio mom. As soon as Mandy was brought into our life, the attention I got from my dad disappeared, and I was greeted with open hostility from my stepmother.
Scott, can you tell your daughter to leave, please? She's upsetting Mandy.
She's just doing her homework.
Cassie, please leave. Just go to your room. Mandy needs silence right now, and you are not being conducive to her development.
Dad?
It's okay, honey. Just go to your room for now.
As time went on, I realized that my father might not have been outwardly mean to me right away. But eventually, he made his decision to side with Diana and Mandy for everything. By the time Mandy could talk, I knew I was not wanted. Everyone was out to get me, and I would often hide in my bedroom, never allowed to visit friends as a way to punish me for whatever slight I had caused. Finally, once I turned 18, Mandy at 11 had become quite the tiny tyrant.
Just move out already. You know Dad and Mom already have enough stress, and you're 18 years old anyway.
Oh, believe me, I plan on moving out as soon as I can. I can't wait to get away from his house.
Mom, she's being mean to me again. Cassie says she can't wait to be away from me.
Cassie, once you cook us dinner, go to your room and no eating. I hope you'll learn from this experience and be kinder to your half-sister in the future. I'll let you know when the dishes are ready to be washed, so don't fall asleep.
But I didn't...
Cassie, don't talk back to your mother. Go to your room this instant.
This whole time, I was the only one doing the chores and making dinner, and I would have my arms grabbed hard enough to leave bruises. I would often cry myself to sleep, and one time my father heard me and he told me to be quiet or I'd get in more trouble. Rarely, Diana would slap me, but once I went to school with a bruised cheek or a black eye, my teachers started asking around and my parents started being more careful with my punishments. No food was common, sleeping without blankets, locked in my bedroom. They would even cut my hair so short and badly that I got made fun of at school and home. I had lots of time for studying and made sure to keep my grades up. I knew there was no college fund for me and had to ensure I earned scholarships and grants. And as soon as I was able, I moved to college, worked my butt off, and was able to graduate with honors. Although it was hard, not having the constant punishments or harassment of my family made it easy. Not once did they call to check on me or even come to my graduation. I got a job, met a nice man named Nate, and we lived and loved and traveled. Everything was going great, and then I got a call.
Hey, Cassie, it's me. Your sister.
Hi, how are you?
I am just shocked you never tried to contact us.
I had my reasons. You never contacted me either, I might point out.
You know, you really broke our parents' hearts.
You know how I was treated there, right?
Well, I mean, you were always getting into trouble.
You know that's not true at all. Look, unless you got something important to say, I am hanging up.
All you had to do was listen.
Why?
Mom and Dad want to see you. They saw your posts on Facebook and miss you. They want to meet your husband, Nate, too.
This was weird. I don't have any of my family as friends on Facebook. And then it dawned on me. I made my account before I had a falling out with my father, and never had the heart to unfriend him. So why didn't they call me?
Look, they want to meet up as a family and try to reconcile everything. Don't you want that too?
I wanted that years ago. It's far too late now. Goodbye, Mandy. I hung up just as she started screaming something. After a week, I thought everything was good, but then I got another call from an unknown number.
Hey darling, it's Dad. How are you doing?
Hi, I was doing good. What do you want?
Look, I just wanted to congratulate you on your life, your marriage, and your fancy new job. That looks like it pays pretty good. You must be doing pretty good money-wise. Way better than we ever had it.
Thank you, but I am not forgiving you and I don't feel the need to see any of you. You all treated me terribly for years and years.
We were just doing the best we could, Cassie. If I could do it all over again, I would have tried to be more gentle. You know your half-sister was still new, and we wanted you to be a good example for her.
But I did all the work. I had to go to be hungry. I got hit and punished all the time. What was that supposed to teach Mandy? Remember when you badly cut my hair off to teach me a lesson? Remember the bruises?
Parents make mistakes, okay? You'll understand when you have your own kids.
Kids you will never see.
What? You are not going to deny me and your mother access to any of our grandchildren.
They won't even know your name. They won't even know you ever existed.
No, you don't get to say that. After all, we did for you. After giving you a roof over your head. No, I won't know. What? Hang on. Diana wants to talk to you, you ungrateful child.
Cassie, don't hang up.
What do you want, Diana?
Please. You never were kind, but I am sorry if you thought we were too mean. Scott's going to cool off and come around. We want to make amends.
It's not something I thought. Like it's an opinion. You sent me to bed without blankets, made me starve, hit me. You did so many things to me all the time.
Look, you weren't the easiest.
I am hanging up. Don't call me again.
We need money.
What? Why?
I had to have surgery. You see, my face wasn't what it used to be, so I had to get something done to help with the lines and stuff. I had to. The other mothers were all doing it. And Scott needed a new truck. And it's so nice. And we wanted to surprise you with how nice it is when you came to visit. We could go camping or just drive around, but we needed it. See, our old car was already in its 5th year, way too old. It was practically a death trap. And now we've fallen behind on the house payments and they want to foreclose on us. On us? We lived there for so many years already. And besides, you owe us. We did feed you most of the time and we didn't make you sleep outside. You just didn't get any blankets. See, we did it to make you stronger and you are. You got a good paying job and without us, you wouldn't have been so successful. We aren't asking for a lot, and you do kind of owe us. And you're our daughter.
You mean stepdaughter. Get my half-sister to bail you out. I don't have a family. I hung up, blocked their numbers, and never answered them again. Over the next few years, I learned from my father's Facebook account that they had to declare bankruptcy. Mandy ended up spoiled and slept around with men and had an incurable STD. She was also in and out of prison a few times due to drug-related charges. I also learned their nice truck was repossessed, and they lost the house. The last post I saw was my father complaining about how their tiny studio apartment wasn't big enough and that he and his wife were on the verge of divorce. To make matters worse for them, as my own revenge, I bought a rundown car under my dad's name, went and parked it at the airport. I know for sure he will receive a ton of parking lots tickets. I felt satisfied and unfriended him. I haven't checked on any of them for years, and I couldn't be happier. Nate and I do have children, and they don't know my family and never will. And we all love each other. We all look out for each other, and we always will. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe. First, she made the floor wet and called me to come meet her. I innocently heeded her call but slipped and fell hard. In an act of feigned sympathy, she helped me up and offered me something to eat.
I'm sorry, dear. Here, have this.
I'd barely tasted the food she offered me when I realized it was peanut butter. I passed out immediately. Hi, I'm Caroline. My life has been like the ocean, never stable. I have had moments of peace, but then there have also been times where I have been burdened by storms and life-threatening billows. I was an only child. My parents were high school sweethearts who eventually got married after college. I was born 5 years after they were married. Actually, my mother suffered miscarriages twice before I was born. It wasn't easy for them, but eventually, they had me. Well, my arrival was met with mixed feelings for my father because, while he was blessed with a child at long last, he lost his wife, my mother. She passed while giving birth to me. My father loved me unconditionally all the same and passed on the love he had for Mom to me. He was still young, and more than a few women were eyeing him up as marriage material, but he decided to not get remarried. Anyways, I grew up in a small neighborhood where gossip flew around from constantly, and occasionally I would hear things about me. There were lots of talk going on about me and how I was a bad omen to my father. Okay, it's true that my mother died while giving birth to me, but then how was that supposed to be my fault? I told Dad, but he asked me to not pay any attention to them. At first I tried, but after my dad lost his job, I began to think that maybe the rumors were true. But what if they are right? I don't know, but I'm very sorry. I'm beginning to feel like they are right.
Ha! What did I tell you about them? Don't pay attention to them, sweetheart. People will always talk. All you have to do is live your life.
It was difficult, as you can bet, but I managed to pull through until I was able to leave the neighborhood for college. That was where I met Knight. At first, I was attracted to him because of his name. I found it both weird and fascinating that anyone would have Knight as a first name. We became study partners and grew to become lovers. Our love blossomed, and we tied the knot shortly after college. Life was going very smoothly for me, and soon after we were married, I became pregnant. 5 months into my pregnancy, I lost my father. It was a big blow for me considering how much I loved him, and it had very terrible consequences on me. I suffered a miscarriage. That was where it all started. You see, my mother-in-law lived in the same city as us, and we lived only about a 15-minute drive away from each other, so she visited us frequently. We weren't the closest of relatives, but she wasn't a problem at least. However, with the miscarriage, she became a thorn in my side.
I should have known it. If only I had asked my son not to marry a murderer, I would be a grandmother by now.
At first, she never said those things directly to me, so I didn't really make anything out of them, though I must confess, I felt hurt, especially the part where she called me a murderer. I mean, how could she even think that I'd kill my own baby? Anyways, I ignored her for the most part of it until she confronted me one day.
So I did a little digging and found some secrets about your family. Your mother suffered a miscarriage twice before having you, right? Then when she finally did, you killed her, so you're an evil omen, huh? Why did you let my son fall in love with you?
I couldn't believe my ears. I don't know what was worse, her reminding me of the one childhood memory I wished I'd forgotten, or her actually crying. Well, maybe it was only an act after all. I was too dumbfounded to speak and only turned away and ran to my room. I refused to tell my husband about it. I wished I had because one day at dinner, he told me some really bad news.
Mom and I have decided that it would be nice if she moves in with us. You know, she's getting old and I don't feel too comfortable about letting her stay on her own.
I pretended to be okay with the plan, but protested mildly when he told me she was moving in the next day. He asked if I had problems with having his mother around, but I lied and told him everything was going to be fine, and I'd love to have her around. Life was hard with her around, but I managed to pull through. I had a reason to be happy again when only about 3 months after her moving in, I became pregnant again. I wanted to keep the news to myself for a while, but I couldn't keep a secret from Knight, and so I broke the news to them. My mother-in-law seemed truly happy and completely fooled me into letting my guard down. Before then, I was always cautious around her. She did lots of nice things for me and even offered to help out in the kitchen. In my second trimester, I suffered lots of dizziness and so was forced to resign from my job and also from the kitchen. My mother-in-law did a great job in babysitting me and taking care of our meals, but little did I know that she still had an agenda against me. Pregnancy made me develop an allergy for peanut butter, and she knew it very much. One day, however, she made a 2-step plan against me. First, she made the floor wet and called me to come meet her. I innocently heeded her call but slipped and fell hard. In an act of feigned sympathy, she helped me up and offered me something to eat.
I'm sorry, dear. Here, have this.
I'd barely tasted the food she offered me when I realized it was peanut butter. I passed out immediately. I don't know how long I remained unconscious, but I woke up in a hospital bed. I opened my eyes to find my husband with red, swollen eyes. I knew how hard it was for him and asked him what was said about me. He told me I was fine now that I'd regained consciousness, but I felt a bit lighter than usual and looked down to see I'd lost my baby. I cried terribly and told my husband what had happened. I was discharged from the hospital, and as soon as we got home, he snapped at his mother and threatened to sue her for endangering my life. But she swore that she was unaware I had an allergy for peanut butter. She pleaded us for mercy, and I was foolish enough to accept her apology. My husband wanted her out, but I interceded on her behalf, and she gained an extended stay. The doctor asked me to stay home for a few months and recover. I told him I was fine, but he insisted, and so I was left without a choice. At first, I hated staying at home and doing nothing, but it paid off in the long run. One afternoon, while moving around the house, I heard my mother-in-law make a phone call. I was never one to eavesdrop on people's conversations, but I couldn't help it. I don't know who it was she was talking to on the other end about how her plans had worked and how she intended to turn her son's heart against me. I quickly recorded everything, her own part of the conversation at least. Later in the day, I snuck into her room and found her phone and checked to see who she had been talking with, and I wrote down their name and phone number and made plans to try to uncover who they were. I waited until dinner time and confronted her. As expected, she denied everything outright and even threatened me, but had no words when I shocked her by playing the recording. She begged us for forgiveness and promised to turn a new leaf. Well, after I'd let my guard down to give her access to my kitchen, and again forgive her after forcing me to have a second miscarriage, do you think I was going to be third-time foolish? I know what you're thinking, and you're right. At least if your guess was no, I had run out of patience and wasn't going to just sit around and watch her ruin us again. But then, I wanted to make sure she suffered. My husband was shocked when I interceded on her behalf again and profusely begged him to give her one more chance. If only she'd known what I had in mind against her, I'm sure she would have left.
I'm very sorry for everything. I feel ashamed. I wish I could turn back the hands of time. I swear I would be the best mother-in-law you could ever have.
It's okay. You are my mother as much as you are his mother. I understand people make mistakes, but I believe we shouldn't judge anyone because of their little misdeeds. I hold no grudge against you. I love you all the same. My husband watched the whole drama with a big expression of shock on his face. He had no idea how I had such a big heart to forgive his mother after everything she did to me. But then he was wrong. I didn't forgive her, and I was sure I never would. She was evil, but while I didn't show it, I had dined and wined on the devil's table too. I swung into action the next day. First, I managed to get a hold of all her financial records, both personal and business. It wasn't very difficult since she kept all her paperwork out in the open on the desk in her room. She was basically retired, but she had people managing her business affairs and accounts for her. I discovered they were evading tax and were also approaching bankruptcy, but had somehow managed to cover things up. I tasked myself with learning how to forge her signature until I could do it no differently from her even with my eyes closed. I was a tech geek, so I managed to hack into their system and registered myself as a business associate under a false alias that could never be traced to me. I discussed a business project with the person she had put in charge as her manager, and promised to reward her handsomely if she could compromise and divert funds to a secret account I gave to her. Luckily, she was extremely greedy, deceptive, but also wasn't smart enough to run a check on things and did just as I'd asked her, even going as far as getting huge loans in the company's name. After 5 months of our shady dealings, I intentionally leaked one of the transactions and allowed her to be caught. It turned out that I'd convinced her into opening a new account in her own name, where I diverted some funds. The company went bankrupt, and with numerous lawsuits against them on allegations of different classes of fraud. My mother-in-law was sentenced to jail for evading tax and misleading investors, while her manager received a heavier sentence. If you're wondering why I dragged her manager into things, she was the one my mother-in-law spoke with on the phone. I had discovered that her name and number matched those of the person that my mother-in-law had been speaking with after she had managed to cause me to miscarry. I realized they were plotting to have me killed so that the manager could marry my husband. I had gotten revenge on both of them as their schemes came to light, and my husband now knew how dangerous his mother truly was. So not only was I able to make my husband see his mother for the evil woman that she truly is, but I also managed to bankrupt the woman as well, as I had convinced the manager to take out high-risk loans which caused all the various companies my mother-in-law owed to go bankrupt. Fast forward to today. I'm blessed with a son and have my enemies in only their second year in jail. I convinced my husband to disassociate himself from his mother, so whatever way, it's a win-win for me. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more stories. By the time I returned, 2 weeks later, I was met with the shock of my life. After watching the recordings from his car and the voice recorder that I had left in our bedroom, I now knew the truth. My husband was having an affair with my best friend. Not only that, but he was also planning to divorce me once Jason was 18. The two of them had even begun making plans to kill my brother and take his inheritance. That was the reason he adopted him, so that it would be easier for him. I was dumbfounded. My parents were both successful business people in New York. My father owned 3 thriving chocolate companies, while my mother had one that exported fabrics to different countries. In other words, we were wealthy. My brother Jason was born 10 years after me, but was born with crippled legs. They were unable to grow muscles very well and were said to be too weak to hold him up. My parents had him undergo necessary surgeries and a variety of different therapy sessions, but nothing worked. We finally gave up trying and accepted his condition. He had to move with the aid of a special wheelchair. However, his disability didn't stop us from loving him. Instead, it made us love him more. The two of us very close. We wore matching clothes throughout our childhood and teenage years despite the large difference in our ages and had each other's backs when needed. Over the years, our parents' businesses grew even broader. We went to the best schools, and by the time I was 25, I'd completed my education and was ready to get into the world of business. As expected, my father put me in charge of one of his companies. One afternoon, I was at a park with my brother, enjoying the evening breeze, when a young man approached us.
Hello, I'm Desmond. Can I sit with you both?
He looked quite decent. Nevertheless, I alerted our bodyguard who was standing around. We had been hounded by a few reporters in the past, and I thought he could be one. In case he wanted to start interviewing us, our bodyguard would come out to stop him. However, he proved my thoughts wrong. He simply spent the 30 minutes he sat with us reading. Afterward, he left. 2 weeks later, I had to recruit workers for some new positions I had created, and Desmond was one of those who applied. I was impressed at how well he did and took him in before others.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll make sure to do my best.
True to his word, he showed his efficiency in the first 2 months, and as time went on, he was excelling at any task that he was given. Seeing this, I figured that he would make a great personal assistant, and I offered him the position. He eagerly accepted, and we began working and spending more time together, which made us get closer than we ever thought. One day, after working, he confessed to me.
I have a huge crush on you, ma'am.
I was shocked, yes, but it was mutual. I couldn't deny that I also liked him. Our relationship proceeded from there, and soon I had to introduce him to my parents.
Isn't he just an employee? Are you sure he truly loves you, or he's just here for your money?
They were doubtful about his intentions, but I did my best to convince them that he was being real with me. My brother, who hadn't seen him since the first time we met, recognized him and took a liking to him immediately. After some time, he proposed to me. Jason congratulated us when we announced it to my family.
Desmond treats me so well. I support your marriage.
Although my parents were still quite doubtful, they had no choice but to support their daughter's happiness. Our wedding wasn't so elaborate, but it was grand. According to Desmond, his parents were dead and he had no relatives, so he had no one by him for the wedding. But I didn't mind. 3 months after our wedding, my parents met with a plane crash accident that claimed their lives. It was a tough period for my brother and I. But Desmond was there for us. He comforted us until we managed to get over it. 3 months later, he suddenly brought up a proposal.
Since Jason isn't of age to control the other companies, why don't I take charge until then?
I didn't like the idea and refused. That brought about our first argument.
I'm your husband. Don't you trust me to do well?
I let him understand that I trusted him. However, even though I didn't like the idea, my parents had set a rule that no one except my brother and I could run the companies. He finally understood my point, and that issue died. I managed to oversee all companies and ensured to expand them even more than my parents did. My husband still worked under me, and I was grateful that he was satisfied with it. Around that time, we began trying to have a child, but none came. Worried, I went to a doctor to find out what was wrong, and they told me that I would need years of fertility treatments if I wanted a chance of becoming pregnant. I was devastated, but as usual, my husband comforted me.
2-3 years isn't a long time. I can wait.
I felt relieved. If Desmond was fine with waiting, I was too. Sometime later, he brought up another suggestion.
Babe, why don't we adopt your brother? While we wait for our children, let's start learning to be parents by taking care of him.
I tried to tell him that Jason was fine being my brother and his in-law, but Desmond was persistent on adopting him. After a few persuasions, I finally agreed. After all, it's entirely for our good. I informed my brother, who was 15 years of age, about our plan. He seemed skeptical about agreeing at first, but he later did after I convinced him that Desmond would be a great father to him, and it would help me learn to be a good mother.
I'm only agreeing to this because I love you both.
We soon began the necessary process. It took about 2 weeks, and afterward we were both legal parents of my brother. Desmond proved to be a great father. He was doing so well that I was free to leave Jason in his care when I had to travel to Italy to take care of an important issue that arose in my father's second company. However, when I returned, I got some news that didn't sit well with me.
Aunt Kathy came over while you were away, and she was here until yesterday. She always slept in the same room with Desmond. He barely had time for me and treated me differently during that period.
I was surprised. Kathy was my best friend, and she told me she was away on a vacation in the UK. I asked my brother if he was sure about what he was saying, and he confirmed that he was. Kathy and Desmond were always bickering every time they were around each other. How could she suddenly spend a whole week with him, and while I was away? I confronted Desmond.
What? How could Jason tell such a lie? I was hardly ever home because I was always at work. You can ask the chef. She was the one who watched over Jason throughout the period you were away.
I called the chef and she confessed that Desmond was telling the truth. I felt betrayed. Why would Jason tell such a lie? I disciplined him greatly. However, no matter how much words I said to him, he stuck to the fact that he was telling the truth. I buried the issue and apologized to Desmond. I also had Jason apologize to him too. A week later, I had to travel again. This time, I spent 3 weeks. On the day I was to return, I got a video message from Jason. As I opened it, I was shocked to see Kathy leaving the house with Desmond. I hurriedly returned home.
I was telling the truth. He's cheating on you.
I was furious. I requested a video call with Kathy, and when she accepted, I saw that she was in bed with her husband. I thought she was pretending and asked her husband a few questions. In his response,
We've been home together all day. What are you talking about?
I was confused. What do I believe? The picture clearly showed Kathy, and Jason said she left that morning, but Kathy's husband was saying otherwise. I couldn't confront Desmond again. Jason had told me how Desmond threatened to kill him if he said anything to me again. I decided to confide in one of my friends who gave me some advice.
You have to see it yourself to know the truth.
I followed her advice. Before I had to travel again, I contacted my personal lawyer. If it ended up being true, I was going to file for divorce. I set a camera in his car and a voice recorder before leaving again. I spent even longer there. By the time I returned, 2 weeks later, I was met with the shock of my life. After watching the recordings from his car and the voice recorder that I had left in our bedroom, I now knew the truth. My husband was having an affair with my best friend. Not only that, but he was also planning to divorce me once Jason was 18. The two of them had even begun making plans to kill my brother and take his inheritance. That was the reason he adopted him, so that it would be easier for him. I was dumbfounded to think that I didn't believe my brother and stupidly made him apologies for trying to tell me the truth. After giving the voice recordings to my lawyer, I stormed to Kathy's house. I was speechless when I arrived and saw not one but 2 Kathys. She introduced the second lady as her best friend. I explained what I was there for and showed the video to her and her best friend. In it, Kathy was making plans to kill my brother and then had used her best friend to make it look like she was innocent. Having been found out, Kathy was disappointed.
I'm so sorry for my behavior toward your family, Amelia. Please forgive her.
But I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I called the police and she was taken away. I stormed to my company with more police officers and arrested Desmond. Confused and not knowing what was happening, he yelled as they pulled him away.
Let go of me! I'm not a criminal!
At the station, they were both told their crimes and bowed their heads in shame. They were charged in court for planning to murder. Desmond had a longer term because at the time, Jason was his son. I divorced him and took full custody of my brother, ensuring he would never have any right over him. My brother and I relocated to Italy afterward. 5 years later, Desmond was released. I'd gotten married to someone better 2 years before. Hearing that he was out, I returned to the country with my husband, Jason, and my daughter. He heard that I was in town and came to see me to tender his apology. He was without a job and had no house of his own. He told me that his parents, which he lied at the beginning were dead, were in serious debts and also had failing health, and he needed his job back as companies were refusing to accept an ex-convict as an employee. I refused, telling him, "I wish you suffer for the rest of your miserable life." Afterward, I had my security men drag him out of my office and throw him out of the building. Months later, received a call from his parents that he made some really bad friends and was so broken they decided to rob a jewelry shop and was shot in the process. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.